show mercy, and in the world where the master is. O Master, please be merciful to us. Give us the shade of your feet. Your famous are all the worlds, but we to the shelter.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janapalabha Girivaridhari Jaya Gopi Janapalabha Girivaridhari Yashodanandana Brajachana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajachana Ranjana Yamunatiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Channavalabha Girivaridhari Yashodanandana Brajachana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamunatiravanachari Yamunatiravanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Kishore Kishori Jaya Kishore Kishori Jaya Kishore Kishori Jaya Kishore Kishori Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajrakacharya Ashtotarashata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Gurantara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pistaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Stay Saraswati Devi Gaudavani Vachayane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Sutari. So today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, chapter 13, entitled Rahugana Converses with Jad Bharata. And are we on text 25 or 26? Are we on the very last verse? We're on the very last verse. Okay, and we might do the first verse of the next chapter then, since this one's so short. We'll see what happens. Okay, so Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So text 26 is a long prose verse, so I guess have we been doing like the word for words, or what have we been doing? Just going right to the translation? Okay, well, maybe we'll just go right to the translation then. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. King Parikshit then told Shukadev Goswami, "My dear Lord, O great devotee sage, you are omniscient. You have very nicely described the position of the conditioned soul, who is compared to a merchant in the forest. From these instructions, intelligent men can understand that the senses of a person in the bodily conception are like rogues and thieves in that forest. And one's wife and children are like jackals and other ferocious animals. However, it is not very easy for the unintelligent to understand the purport of this story, because it is difficult to extricate the exact meaning from the allegory. I therefore request Your Holiness to give the direct meaning." Purport. There are many stories and incidents in Srimad Bhagavatam that are described figuratively. Such allegorical descriptions may not be understood by unintelligent men. Therefore, it is the duty of the student to approach a bona fide spiritual master for the direct explanation. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 5th canto, 13th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Further Talks Between King Rahugana and Jada Bharata. So I haven't been here for the chapter. I haven't read this chapter in quite a while, but we understand that Parikshit Maharaj is hearing from Shukadev Goswami about Jad Bharata and King Rahugana's conversation. And in that conversation, or in that instruction, Jad Bharata was speaking allegorically, right? So Parikshit Maharaj is a little bewildered. He's saying to, well, not bewildered, but he's concerned about those who are bewildered, the conditioned souls. And he's asking Shukadev Goswami that, yes, you've nicely described the position of the conditioned soul. You compared him to a merchant in the forest, that just as a man will dream of making great fortune and, becoming very wealthy and successful. So the living entity, the soul, enters this material world with this dream that I'm going to enjoy. It's like children who have a playground or a playhouse. There's the quote-unquote real world, and then there's the imaginary world of the children. So when the child is, quite small, say the girl wants to pretend she's cooking and doing this and doing that. So the parents will buy like a play kitchen, a little plastic stove and little plastic refrigerator and plastic knives and spoons and what have you. So she can play as though I'm the cook. She's not really a cook, right? There's no fire, there's no real food there, nothing. But she gets enjoyment out of thinking, yes, I'm the cook. And the parents don't say, oh, this is just all fake, it's just a game. They really let her feel like, yeah, oh, wow, what a beautiful thing you just cooked. Oh, what a beautiful cake you just baked, etc., etc. So it's explained that the conditioned soul is like that. We want to pretend that we're the enjoyer. We want to pretend that we are the proprietor. We want to pretend that we are the controller. We want to pretend that we are the benefactor of others. So because the conditioned soul has, and that's what it means to imitate God. We read in Prabhupada's books, practically every page, Prabhupada strongly says, the problem with the conditioned soul is that we're trying to be God, imitate God. And when I would read that, I would always think, what? I was never so bold as to say, I am God, and I've never met anybody who said, I am God. But when I understood this point, that Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Bhoktaram Jagyatapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram Suridam Sarvabhutanam. He says, I am the enjoyer. I am the controller. I am the proprietor. I am the well-wisher of all living entities. Then I understood, oh, this is how we're claiming to be God. Every time we think, I can be an enjoyer. I can be a proprietor. I can be a controller. I can be the benefactor of others. Then that means I'm claiming to be God. In so many words. So here it was explained that the conditioned soul, he comes to this material world. I think it'll be explained more in the next chapter. But the conditioned soul comes to this material world with the idea that I'm going to enjoy, I'm going to possess, I'm going to control. So the allegory here was of a merchant who goes into the forest thinking he'll gather up, maybe some fallen wood from the dead trees. He'll collect a bunch of wood. It doesn't cost anything to collect a bunch of wood. Then he'll take it back into the city and he'll sell it and he'll get great fortune from selling it. So like this, exploiting the resources of nature, taking them for myself, and how can I make a profit out of it? So this is the position of the conditioned soul. This material nature is not meant for our enjoyment or for our exploitation or for us to control. But we have that feeling that it is. In fact, many people actually say, oh, God put us in this world to enjoy. You've probably heard that if you go out on book distribution or some kind of preaching. People will actually say that. No, God gave us all these things. Everything that's in this material world is meant for us to enjoy. There's nothing wrong with, using things, taking things for my enjoyment, etc., etc. But actually, the conditioned soul is not the master of material energy. So if you're not the master of something, you're not the proprietor of something, yet you try to control or own that thing, then what are you called? You're called a thief. This is like the basic ABC lessons of Krishna consciousness, to learn what I should put my hands on and what should I keep my hands off. Because as soon as I put my hands on something that doesn't belong to me, I'm a thief. So Krishna's claiming that he's the proprietor of everything and everyone. So as soon as the conditioned soul touches something with the idea that I'm going to get something out of it, that's called exploitation. And as soon as the conditioned soul thinks like that and does like that, all his troubles begin. It's like as soon as you light the match and bring it over to the pool of, kerosene or something, it's going to catch fire, it's going to explode, whatever. As soon as you light that match. So as soon as we touch material energy with the idea that I'm going to enjoy, it's like a chain reaction, and all of our suffering begins. So it's explained that the conditioned soul, he's the marginal energy of the Lord. The Lord has three main energies: the spiritual energy, which is his internal spiritual energy, then the external material energy, and then the marginal energy, or tatashta energy, which is us, the living entities. We are spiritual. We are 100% spiritual, but we're very tiny sparks of spirit. So being so small, we can be controlled by either the Lord's spiritual energy or by the Lord's external material energy, Maya. We have to be controlled by one or the other. We're not independent, free entities. Being so small, we're always under control. When the living entity takes shelter of Krishna through Guru Parampara, then he's under the protection of the Daivi Prakriti. Mahatmanas tumam parta daivim prakrita ashritaha. That when one is actually a Mahatma, one is considered a Mahatma when one actually takes shelter of Krishna. And when he actually takes to the process of taking shelter of Krishna, and taking shelter of Krishna means through the Guru Parampara, when a soul does that, he's considered Mahatma, and Krishna says he is always under the protection of my divine energy. He is not under the protection or control of the external energy. He's only under the control of the superior divine energy, which is actually Radharani. So the living entity has that choice. This is the only freedom the living entity has. He can choose by his own volition that, shall I take the path of surrendering to Krishna, taking shelter of Krishna, or should I avoid the path of taking shelter of Krishna? And as soon as he says, I want to avoid the path of taking shelter of Krishna, then he must be under the control of the avidya potency. Avidya means darkness, ignorance. You only have, it's like binary numbers, right? It's either 1 or 0. There's no other choice. So if we turn on the light, there's no darkness. If we turn off the light, then there's darkness. There's no in between. So That Tatashta energy, the jivas, they're compared to like the seashore, the beach on the seashore. Sometimes the sand is covered by the water when the tide comes in. The sand is covered by the water. And when the tide goes out, the sand is dry. It's free from the water. So it can be either covered by the water or uncovered by the water. So the Tatashta Shakti, the Jiva souls, are like that. They can be covered by the avidya potency, or they can be not covered by the avidya potency. But here in the material world, the conditioned soul is always covered by that avidya potency. And the only way the Jiva soul cannot be covered by that avidya potency is by taking proper shelter of Krishna. So this avidya potency begins, it has 5 covering aspects. So the very first aspect of that avidya potency is that it forces the living entity to identify as a product of matter. One can't exist in the material world unless one identifies himself as a product of matter. That's what the bodily conception of life is all about. So one is submerged in that bodily conception of life. And then, due to that bodily conception of life, the second aspect of avidya that one experiences is fear. Why fear? Because if I identify as a product of matter, then I necessarily must conclude that I'm temporary. That death means the end of everything. If I am this body, that means when death comes, I'm finished. Curtains closed. And the third aspect of that avidya potency is that the living entity is not capable of understanding that there's something more than matter, that he is a spiritual entity. It's just, he can't comprehend. Even he hears, he gets good instructions or what have you. It's just bewildering. He cannot perceive how it is that I could be a spiritual entity, that there's something more than matter. And then the fourth aspect of that avidya potency is that one believes that my happiness will be attained through sense gratification, through material pursuits for wealth or possessions or fame or fortune, whatever. And then the fifth aspect of that avidya potency is that one becomes completely mad for sense gratification. One will even kill their own mother if she stands in the way of the pursuit of happiness. So this avidya potency is what binds the conditioned soul to the material world. And the analogy was as a merchant going to the forest. So what did that merchant find when he went to the forest and made a bunch, he brought some firewood back and he sold it, and then he sold some more, then he sold some more, and he might make a great fortune out of it, right? But what happens to that great fortune? Does it just sit there or multiply or? Yes. It said that the family members are like jackals and wolves, was it? That ferocious animals, because they come to take away the wealth of that person. As soon as one has some wealth, oh, Daddy, I need A, B, and C. Oh, husband, I need D, E, and F. And pretty soon, his wealth is going out of his pockets like water. So as fast as it comes in, that's how fast it leaves. So all of us are in that position. Even we might say, well, I don't have any family members. I'm not making wealth, and I'm not, having family members take my wealth from me. But we have a whole network of senses, which are the real enemies of the self. because it's the senses that are demanding the sense objects. So one has to go and spend money on sense objects, right? So there's, according to the Vedic literatures, there's 8.4 million types of arrangements of the senses. We all have a network of senses: eyes, ears, nose, mouth, sense of touch, right? All living entities have senses. But the difference between the living entities, like the species, is that the network is composed a little differently. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that according to the configuration of the mind, when one leaves this body at the point of death, whatever configuration the mind is in at death, that blueprints, it dictates what kind of senses are going to gather around that mind in the next birth. The mind is the repository of desire. The mind is thinking, it's feeling, it's willing. That's the activity of the mind. So the mind is thinking about sense objects. Oh, look at that over there. Isn't that pretty? Isn't that nice over there? And then it's feeling, wow, what would it be? I mean, it looks really nice. I wonder what it would taste like if I put it in my mouth, I wonder what it tastes like. I wonder what it feels like. And then willing, okay, I have to have that thing. How am I going to get it? So it starts with contemplation of the sense objects, thinking about the sense objects, and then feeling it. Like, how would it feel to taste or touch or smell that thing? And then willing, how am I going to go about acquiring that object so that I can actually enjoy it? So in order for the conditioned soul to enjoy that object, obviously one needs to have senses in order to contact that sense object. So when the soul leaves the body at death, the subtle body made up of mind, intelligence, and ego carries that soul out of the body. And based on the configuration of the mind, what kind of desires, what kind of thinking, feeling, and willing is there, that subtle body will carry the soul to a particular womb of a particular mother, or a particular seed of a particular plant, or what have you, an egg of a particular bird, what have you. The subtle body will carry the soul to a particular material situation. Why? So that that soul, which is covered by a subtle body, can now acquire a physical body that perfectly matches the desires of the subtle body of the mind. So now we are finding that our mind is surrounded by the senses. And the senses are the instruments through which the mind can satisfy its desires. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains in this, every time we take prasadam, before we eat, we chant the prasad sevaya prayer. And in that prayer, composed by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he explains that our senses are a network. They're all working together. Like if you have a network of computers, they're all somehow connected with each other. They can communicate with each other, etc. The senses are like a network. And they're like paths that are leading to death. And yet these senses are very difficult to control because they're always demanding their sense objects, because the mind is working through them. So these senses are always demanding sense objects. And of all the senses, the tongue is the most voracious and difficult to control. The tongue wants to speak something, nonsense. The tongue wants to eat something, nonsense. And it's explained that every time the senses touch their sense objects, what happens? The living entity suffers. Why does the living entity suffer? Why should I suffer if my tongue touches pizza? Why should I suffer if my ears touch some, jazz music or something? Why should I suffer if my eyes see some beautiful person? Why should I suffer? But my question is, why is it set up like that? Why is the system set up like that? That as I touch the sense objects, the mode of passion takes over even more and more strongly, and then I get this reaction and that reaction. Why is it set up? Yes, because I'm a thief, right? So the senses are compared, especially the tongue, the senses are compared to like prostitutes. Say a woman has a husband, but then, on the side, she goes out and commits, prostitution. So, like that, she's meant to be with her husband, but she's going out and being enjoyed by other men, right? That's called prostitution. So the senses are like that. They're actually meant, if we have senses, they're meant for Krishna's service, for Krishna's enjoyment. That's what Krishna's service means, assisting Krishna in his enjoyment, facilitating Krishna's enjoyment. Many people sometimes, when we say serving Krishna, they're not quite sure what that means. How can I serve Krishna? Serving Krishna simply means bring enjoyment to Radha and Krishna, somehow or other, facilitate their enjoyment. So the senses are simply meant for facilitating Krishna's enjoyment. But in the material world, we're thieves. Our senses are like prostitutes. Instead of being in our mind, too, for that matter, and our intelligence, instead of being used in Krishna's service, they're going out over here into the red light district, trying to be the enjoyers of something else. So we should understand that our senses are our worst enemies. And the only way the senses can be controlled is if the mind takes charge, Krishna conscious charge of the senses. And the only way the mind can take Krishna conscious charge of the senses is if the intelligence takes charge of the mind. Without proper engagement of the intelligence in Krishna consciousness, the mind will be our worst enemy. If the intelligence, just like that analogy of the chariot, the person's driving a chariot with 5 horses. The 5 horses are the 5 senses: ears, eyes, nose, mouth, tactile sense. Then the reins, which are directly maneuvering the senses, are compared to the mind. If the mind says turn right, then they turn right. If the mind says turn left, then they turn left. And then the personality who's operating the reins is the intelligence. And then the passenger in the back seat, who is either getting a bumpy ride or a smooth ride, that's the soul. So the soul is going to suffer or enjoy depending on the actions of the intelligence. So of all the senses, the mind and the intelligence, the most important one is the intelligence. Because unless the driver of the chariot, is knowing where he's going and how to drive the chariot properly, the passenger is definitely going to suffer. So Parikshit Maharaj, being a very intelligent disciple, he says to Shukadeva Goswami that, oh, this analogy that has been explained about the conditioned soul here in the material forest, that was a really, really nice analogy, and I'm sure people with good intelligence are going to nicely understand it and benefit immensely from this allegory. However, unintelligent people, they're not going to be able to understand because it's very intricate and, complicated. It's not direct. So could you please have mercy on us and re-explain the whole story again, but in a very direct, straightforward manner, not in an allegorical manner. Please make it crystal clear to us so that we can understand. And Prabhupada said this is the duty of the disciple. If they're hearing something and it's not crystal clear, immediately the disciple should raise their hand and ask, could I please have clarification on that point? And if we don't ask for clarification, oh, that's all right, I didn't understand it, it flew over my head, it doesn't matter, well, then we'll never understand the lesson. And unless our intelligence is perfectly fixed in Krishna consciousness, there's every chance that the mind and senses are going to go wayward. When we find ourselves having difficulty in Krishna consciousness, we go out, we leave the cocoon of the temple, and we go out to the material world for whatever purposes, to buy things for the deities or to do book distribution or whatever it may be, do our work or our schooling. It's very easy. Many times we'll find the senses going, ooh, I smell popcorn over there. Ooh, look at those pastries in the bakery shop window. And oh, look at this, look at that. It's so easy for the senses and the mind to start wandering and thinking, feeling, and willing. Why are we having that difficulty? Because the intelligence is not fixed. If the intelligence is fixed, there's no question of the mind and the senses wandering. So Parikshit Maharaj is demonstrating this understanding that unless my intelligence is perfectly fixed in Krishna consciousness, there's every chance that I'm going to simply continue being a conditioned soul. Therefore, O Lord, he says to Shukadeva Goswami, please elucidate these teachings in a more straightforward manner so that my intelligence can be completely convinced of the teachings and I won't go wayward. So Prabhupada said in today's purport that there are many stories and incidents in Srimad Bhagavatam, not just this one. Many stories and incidents in Srimad Bhagavatam that are described figuratively. Such allegorical descriptions may not be understood by unintelligent men. Therefore, it is the duty of the student to approach a bona fide spiritual master for the direct explanation. Now, this is not a license for us to read the Srimad Bhagavatam and say, oh yeah, this is just all figurative, Like, especially when we get to the 10th canto, oh, it's just all figurative, how Krishna killed the demons, and, some of these demons were like huge. What is it when they said that when Putana was killed, her body was like 8 miles long or something? Oh, that's just figurative. Or when it said that 640 million soldiers, wasn't it, died on the battlefield of Kurukshetra? Oh, how did 640 million men fit on a battlefield? That's twice the population of America. How did they all fit in this little battlefield called Kurukshetra? Oh, it's figurative. Or the demon Ravana, he had 10 heads, right? Oh, that's just figurative. Head number 1 represents this, and head number 2 represents that. And people do this all the time. Like all the time. If you're not reading Srimad Bhagavatam, especially Krishna Lila, as it's being presented by the Gaudiya Vaishnava Guru Parampara, most definitely you're going to be hearing it from somebody who takes it as allegory, as figurative poetic speech, symbolic of something else. For example, yesterday, out distributing books, I met one guy on campus. And, he looked like a really hip guy. He's got like hemp jewelry on and everything. And he practically came up to me. I was just about to approach him, and he came up to me. And, oh yeah, I know Bhagavad Gita. It's spoken by Ram, right? And I said, no, Krishna. And I showed him the picture. It's Krishna speaking to Arjuna. Oh yeah, Krishna. Okay, yeah. And then, we're talking, and he said, yeah, I've got a few Hare Krishna friends and people who are into like Buddhism and this and that. And then he said, you know why the Hindu gods are blue? And he said, yeah, the reason that they're blue, it's not that they're actually, it's not that actually. And I said, well, Krishna, he has a dark bluish black complexion like a rain cloud. And then this boy says, no, he's not actually that color. What it is, and then he gave some explanation, which I don't even quite understand or remember, but some explanation about how there was a aura around him of some kind of energy, so that when those of us with human eyes looked at him, we got this reflection of blue, but he wasn't actually blue. And then he said, yeah, and like some of the people, they have like many arms, right? Like Vishnu has 4 arms, and Kali has so many arms. And he said it's not that they actually had more than 2 arms, but they knew the art of how to move them that made trails, so that when you looked at them, you would see the trail. Like total speculation. Why? Because of this disease, thinking that if I read something that doesn't add up, it doesn't compute with my puny little material intelligence, with my puny little experience in this 3-dimensional black and white world, if it doesn't compute with that, then it must be allegory, it must be figurative, it must be symbolic, it must be exaggeration, it must be fairy tales. So when Prabhupada says in today's purport, there are many stories and incidents in Srimad Bhagavatam which are spoken figuratively, and that cannot be understood by less intelligent people unless they're explained by one's spiritual master in a more direct way. We shouldn't now go and read and say, every time I don't understand something or I think something is far out and unbelievable, that it's figurative. We should only accept something as figurative or allegorical when Prabhupada himself says it is. So he's telling us that this particular instance is an allegory, so we can understand it that way. Can we think of any other incidents or stories in the Bhagavatam that are the story of King Paranjana? Yeah, anything else? Yeah, that's along in those chapters. Mm-hmm. So this is a good example, right? How could, say a war or whatever go on for 10,000 years? Or he fought with the alligator for 10,000 years. We should understand that I guess later in the 5th canto, we're going to be reading about the cosmography of the Vedic universe, the Vedic cosmography. And there it's explained that in this earthly realm of Bharatavarsha, that time is as we know it, 24 hours in a day, 365 days in a year. We know what a human year looks like, right? But in other varshas, what to speak of in other planetary systems, time acts differently. So when the sun, we won't go into a whole description of that right now, but in a nutshell, when the sun makes its 360-degree orbit, when it moves its 360-degree orbit around the plane of Bhumandala, humans in Bharatavarsha experience 360 days. The sun moves 360 degrees in its orbit. This is according to Vedic cosmography, not modern cosmography. When it makes 360-degree movement, one complete cycle, those on Earth experience 360 days and nights. However, the living entities who are in the rest of Bhumandala, well, I should say the concentric islands that surround the inner island of Jambudweep, that those residents, they only experience 1 day and 1 night. Apparently that whole disk is moving with the sun. I'm not remembering all the details right now. I'll have to look it up. But in any case, yeah, because I guess that the disk is moving with the sun. They experience 1 day and 1 night. No, the disk isn't moving with the sun. Sorry. But anyway, the way the structure is, those on the outer concentric islands of Bhumandala, they only experience 1 day and 1 night in the time that we experience 360 days and 360 nights. So when it said that, maybe Gajendra fought with the alligator for 10,000 years, it's not meaning that it was 10,000 years necessarily in human time, or is it celestial time, or, So 10,000 years of human time on those planets is something like, was it 16,000? I'm trying to remember. 1 year is 60,000, I believe, of their years. So we have to understand there's many, many different dimensions, and there's many different perceptions of time, depending on where the incident took place. So did that incident take place on planet Earth? Did it take place in another area of Bhumandala? Did it take place on a higher planetary system? So that's why we have to, be inquisitive like that. That's what intelligence is for. Well, what does that mean? Like, for example, it said that when the sages assembled at Naimisharanya, why are we hearing Srimad Bhagavatam in the first place? The reason that we're hearing Srimad Bhagavatam is because the sages of Naimisharanya, they saw that Kali Yuga is about to begin. They were very, very concerned for humankind. And they thought, well, let's assemble at the forest of Naimisharanya, and we will perform a 1,000-year sacrifice. And we will perform whatever sacrifice that we can that will be most beneficial to bring auspiciousness to the living entities in Kali Yuga. So then Sutta Goswami happened to be coming by. They were getting different opinions. Which sacrifice should we do? Let's do that one. No, how about that one? How about that one? How about that one? Which is the best one to do? Then Sutta Goswami comes by. They recognize him as a effulgent, transcendentally situated person. They invite him to sit down, offer him the seat of esteem, and they inquired from him, we're about to do a 1,000-year sacrifice for the good of man in Kali Yuga. What sacrifice do you suggest we should do for the next 1,000 years? And Sutta Goswami said, just simply hear and chant Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna Katha. And therefore they started their questions and answers with Sutta Goswami, and that's been recorded here for us to read it. So one wonders what that means, 1,000-year sacrifice. Was it 1,000 years by human time? If so, we wouldn't have it done yet. Well, 5,000 years ago, I guess we'd have it done by now, but were they sitting there for 1,000 years on this earth? So anyway, when we come across things that we don't understand, we don't conclude it's figurative, it's allegorical. We have to inquire. So we know which ones to take allegorically, which ones to take actually quite literally. And we're going to have that difficulty when we get to the chapters on the cosmography of the universe. Many devotees have become very confused when it comes to that point. Do we take the measurements and the time scales, etc., given in the 5th canto as figurative, as literal? Yeah, it gets very difficult to understand. So it takes, our inquiring from authorities how to take these things properly. Okay, so we'll end there, see if there's any questions or comments. Acharya Nishtaprabhu.
This is kind of a, I guess, unique question, but you were mentioning that the soul enters into a womb based on the configuration of his mind at the end of his life. I'm wondering, to achieve the human form of life, actually what happens is that a sperm is given the opportunity to develop a body. But we hear that the only way to develop the human body is from either a cow or a monkey or a lion or another human birth. So how exactly does the soul enter the human body? Is it that it's in a, because that's more like I don't want to say bacteria, but it seems a much more lower state of consciousness as a sperm cell, and then it's somehow selected.
Okay. It's not that each cell in the body is an individual living entity. So, yes, obviously, the living entity enters the womb of a mother by first entering a sperm cell of a male, and that then is injected into the womb of the woman and pregnancy takes place. We all know that. So how does the soul get in the body of a man? How does the soul enter the sperm cell, you might ask, right? So it's explained in the Bhagavad Gita, in one of the purports there, that if a soul is coming from a heavenly planet, falling back into human society because they've exhausted their pious karma, and so now it's time for them to again take birth in the human species, it's said that that soul comes to earth in the form of raindrops. And those raindrops then nourish the seeds of grains like wheat and rice and what have you. And that then man eats that grain. Like we always hear, grain gives vitality, right? Man eats that grain, and then from that grain, that soul is now in the body of the man, and then can take shelter of the sperm cell, and then impregnation into the woman, and then form a human body. Now, that's one description given for a soul that's coming from heavenly planets. Other descriptions we hear are that the soul enters human life from evolution through the species here on Earth, and that the the species from which one then enters human life are the monkey, the lion, and the cow. Now, one does not say one is living as a cow. Well, first, let's back up. So those human beings that are in the mode of goodness, it said, have come up through the cow species. Those who are in the mode of passion have come up through the lion species. And those in the mode of ignorance have come up through the monkey species. And in fact, that is why Darwin and others propose that man evolved from ape. And they probably have in that sense. So it does not mean that, oh, here's a devotee who's like really, really, really in the mode of goodness. They must have been a cow in their last life. No, it's saying that if a person is in a cow body, a soul is living in a cow body, when they leave that body at death, if now they're ready to take birth in a human body, they will take birth in a human body which is more influenced by the mode of goodness, but it doesn't mean they're going to, boom, take birth in a totally civilized, intelligent, maturely advanced human society. We start off, after the animal species, we start off in the uncivilized human form. There's many, many, many levels of human life, not just the big, fancy, beautiful, intelligent, civilized human. So from animal species, we take birth in the more uncivilized human forms, and from there progress. But even in those uncivilized forms, some are influenced by the mode of goodness more, some are influenced by the mode of passion more, some are influenced more by the mode of ignorance. Yeah, they have to enter. It's not exactly like that. It's not that the sperm is a bacteria. There's a difference between cells of the body and bacteria. So the soul is being carried by the subtle body. It'll either go into a seed, take shelter of a seed, if it's meant to take a plant body, or it will enter an egg, if it's meant to take birth as a bird, or it will enter like perspiration or other fermenting chemicals if it's meant to take birth as a bacteria, let's say, or it will enter the sperm cell of a male if it's meant to take a human body. It's not that, oh, he's been demoted to a bacteria. It's just a vehicle that carries the soul. Just like the mind and the intelligence are a vehicle that carries the soul, right? So now it has to undergo the mechanism by which pregnancy is going to take place. So the sperm cell carries the soul to the womb of the mother. But it's not that the sperm cell is a bacteria or a living entity in and of itself. It's like a vehicle. Just like the mind is not an entity, a living entity, it's carrying the soul. It's a vehicle. So no other, big details have been given on this. We can only try to piece it together from what we read from Prabhupada's explanations, but that's the explanation we hear. The soul is being carried by the subtle body. Somehow it enters the sperm cells of the male, and if coming in contact with the egg can cause impregnation, and then the soul develops its physical body as an embryo, et cetera, et cetera. No other details have been given. But we shouldn't think, oh, it's been demoted to a bacteria body. It's not like that. Dr. Luke.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. This is a two-part question. I was hoping you could share a little bit about what we hear from Rupa Goswami on the definition of pure devotional service, that it's not covered by karma or jnana. That's the first part. The second part is, how can we ensure that our pursuit of knowledge does not, no, I'll put it the positive way. How can we ensure that our pursuit of knowledge nourishes our devotion?
So Rupa Goswami says, Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadyanavritam anukulyena krishna anushīlanam bhaktir uttamam. He said that pure devotional service, which is the only way that we can achieve Krishna's audience, pure devotional service must be completely free of all motives, and it should not be mixed with karma and jnana. Karma meaning mundane activities, jnana meaning the pursuit of knowledge. So how can we make sure that when we're trying to fix up our intelligence in Krishna consciousness by having it completely bathed in transcendental knowledge, how can we be careful that we're not being guilty of jnana, being covered by jnana mishra bhakti? Well, it's simple. It's like this. What does that mean when Rupa Goswami says that our devotional service should not be mixed with jnana and karma? He means that we shouldn't be contaminating our bhakti with materially motivated karma and jnana. So when we want to bathe our intelligence in transcendental knowledge, is our motive, is our mentality that I'm going to conquer Krishna, I'm going to be Krishna conscious by having all this knowledge, as though I'm going to understand Krishna with my intelligence? Or is my motive, let me purify my intelligence by bathing it in transcendental knowledge so that Krishna will be pleased to reveal himself to me because my mind and intelligence will be purified? We don't study Prabhupada's books just so we can have a bunch of information, so I can show off. I have so many verses memorized, and I can explain this, and I can explain that. We study Srila Prabhupada's books so that we can preach to our mind. Because our mind is the real, we're so eager to break out of the doors and go outside and preach, right? Yes, we have 500 Bhakti Vriksha programs and 25 home programs and 10,000 books being distributed, but we have to preach to ourselves. So the mind is what needs to be preached to. Well, who's going to preach to the mind? The intelligence. So we bathe our intelligence in transcendental knowledge from Prabhupada's books so that we can appreciate Krishna, understand Krishna, not that we're understanding him with our intelligence, but our intelligence is being purified so that the spiritual intelligence can perceive Krishna. And so we can preach to our mind, and then we can preach to the minds of others, which is actually what you're doing when you're going out preaching. You're just preaching to people's minds, mostly, So it's the motive. Am I being absorbed in study because I just want to have a whole bunch of knowledge so I feel good by it and I can show off? Or am I thinking, that's how I'm going to conquer Krishna? Or am I being absorbed in study so that I can be purified, so that I can be of some kind of instrument, of some kind of use as an instrument in preaching? And we want to associate with Prabhupada. If Prabhupada was sitting right here to give class, how many people do you think would be in the temple room? If it was announced, today's Srimad Bhagavatam class will be given by Srila Prabhupada in person, we wouldn't be able to get in the temple room. It'd be so crowded, right? Because we'd be so eager to hear from Prabhupada. Why? Because the words emanating from the lips of a pure devotee are saturated with the saffron mercy particles emanating from the feet of the Lord. So when the sound vibrations emanating from the lips of a pure devotee enter our ears, even if we might not intellectually understand them, they go directly to the heart and purify the heart. Similarly, the words written by a pure devotee are saturated with the saffron mercy particles from the feet of the Lord. So when we hear from Srila Prabhupada, we're getting enlivened, we're getting purified, we're associating with him. Don't you want to associate with Srila Prabhupada? So read his books. How else are you going to associate with him? I mean, you can stand here and like look at his Archa Vigraha all day long and bathe him and clothe him, but how long can you do that? How many minutes of the day can you bathe and dress and feed? And that's one form of associating with Prabhupada. But Vani is even more potent than Vapu. So the Vani, or the words of the spiritual master, we read Bhagavatam to associate with Srila Prabhupada. And if we properly associate with Srila Prabhupada, we'll necessarily be associating with all the personalities in Srimad Bhagavatam. So it's all about motive. Okay, I think we went a little over time. So should we end, or what should we do? Okay, the vote was that those who want to be excused may be excused, and those who want to ask a couple questions may ask a couple questions.
So, thank you so much for coming back to Chicago. Hare Krishna, Mataji. So, trying to understand this topic of coming out of the material world, and mostly we understand Krishna through his energies. So, my question is, in the beginning, as we become more and more aware of the Sat, the Chit, the Ananda potencies, and we start experiencing a little bit of that in our own lives, better understanding of who I am, then a desire to serve and feeling the happiness. But still, it feels very much, it's like you're dancing with someone, but you're very much focused on your own moves. I'm becoming more of a servant, I'm becoming more purified. It's still very much about me and Krishna's energies. Him as a person isn't really so much present in my consciousness or my activity. So my question is, at what point does one shift from the energies to the energetic, and how does that shift happen?
How does an apple become ripe? Stay on the tree. It's the process. Maturation happens step by step by step. So in a purport to the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada says like that in the beginning stages of devotional service, one relishes the service itself. Like I like cooking, or I like singing in kirtan. It's my service and I like it. And one does their service and they feel some enjoyment, ecstasy from that. But in more advanced stages of devotional service, one relishes enjoyment from the object of their service. You understand the difference? So right now we're trying to serve Guru and Krishna. And we're enjoying, like you said in your words, the potencies or energies that are involved in that. But at a more advanced or mature stage, we'll actually experience the enjoyment of that person from the personality that we're serving. And how does that happen? It happens by following the process. We can't just like pretend that, okay, I'm having a loving exchange with Krishna right now. So that's the process of Vaidhi Bhakti, that we follow the rules and regulations, we do everything according to, instruction, and we then develop a little raga in our heart. It's more spontaneous. I'm not doing it just because I have to or because I'm told to, but I'm actually getting a taste from this service. Now I do my service because I actually want to do it. I'm getting something out of it. That's why I'm attracted over here to do that service. And then as one progresses, their raga increases and increases and increases. And now what they're really relishing is the reciprocation with the person that they're serving. So the service is there and the service is wonderful, but it's the reciprocation from the person is what they're realizing now. Right now we're thinking, I'm enjoying cooking and I'm enjoying singing in kirtan and I'm enjoying this and that. enjoyment is coming from that. I get a taste from these services. But in the future, as we progress, we'll realize that what I'm really tasting is Krishna's direct reciprocation. Okay. Parama Karuna Prabhu. Okay.
Protection of Devi Prakriti. He comes in immediately when it is the shelter, it comes immediate, or it take a time. The experience, person get experience, he come as Devi Prakriti.
Well, actually, we can't engage in devotional service unless the Daivi Prakriti is in our life. But it depends on the degree, right? It depends on the degree. The Daivi Prakriti is coming into our life in being implanted in our heart as the Bhakti Lata Bij, the seed of devotional service. If we water it correctly, we have, you plant a seed in the ground, you have to water it correctly. And not only that, but you have to pull out all the weeds that grow on the side that try to, squelch it. And not only that, you have to build a fence around it so the deer and the rabbits don't come and eat your plant. So it's not that you just plant the seed in the soil and everything's okay. You have to water it, you have to pull out the weeds, you have to put a fence around it. So the Daivi Prakriti, the divine energy in the form of Radharani's potency of bhakti, is coming into our heart as the Bhakti Lata Bij, the seed of devotional service being planted there by a Vaishnava devotee of the Lord. But if we don't water it properly, hearing and chanting properly, if we don't pull out the weeds properly, which means cleansing our heart of all the anartas, if we don't put up a fence, which is the protection of the association of devotees, protecting ourselves by the association of devotees, then that devotional creeper is going to get shriveled up. And will make, mostly due to namaparad, that devotional creeper is going to get shriveled up. So that means we're not properly taking shelter of Krishna. Proper taking shelter of Krishna is not just, I accept the seed. That's just one step of taking shelter. The rest of the process is a process. It's not a one-time event. I surrendered to Krishna on January 2nd, 1972 or something. Surrender to Krishna is moment by moment by moment. I accept the seed in my heart. I do the watering process. I pull out the weeds. I put up the protective fence. It's a whole package. When one fully takes shelter of Krishna, Mahatmanastu Mamparta Daivim Prakrita Ashrataha. Krishna in that verse is talking about full surrender. Previous verse, he was talking about those who are still deluded. But for those who are completely undiluted and undiluted, their bhakti is not diluted by these delusions over here. When one's perfectly under taking shelter of Krishna, that means they're perfectly under the shelter of Daivi Prakriti. That's how you take shelter of Krishna, is by taking shelter of Radharani, the Daivi Prakriti. How are you going to take shelter of Krishna? You have to take shelter of her. How do you take shelter of her? Through her representatives, the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Okay, Bhaktajan. We'll do one more question and then call it quits.
Thank you so much for the class. I have two questions. Maybe this can be after class. My first question is this. One of my friends, he's a non-devotee, but he's trying to read Prabhupada's books, and he asked me a question that I couldn't answer, so maybe I can address it. He was asking the mode of goodness. People can be situated in the mode of goodness if they're either a non-devotee or devotee. Now, what is exactly the difference? I know for a fact that by devotional service, one can excel over the mode of goodness. But how do you explain to a person who's not practicing sadhana bhakti, but he's in the mode of goodness, so he doesn't see that, there's no need to extend.
So the goal of life is not to be in the mode of goodness. One who's in the mode of goodness is not only in the mode of goodness. They may be predominantly in the mode of goodness, but there's plenty of contamination by the modes of passion and ignorance. So if something is not going up, then it is necessarily going down, because nothing is static. It's dynamic. So if one's mode of goodness is not being raised up to the sattva guna, the Shuddha sattva platform. Sattva guna means material mode of goodness. Shuddha sattva means the 100% purified mode of goodness, which is now transcendental because it's free of any contamination from the modes of passion and ignorance. So a non-devotee, by definition, cannot purify their sattva guna to the Shuddha sattva platform, because you can only go to the Shuddha sattva platform by taking shelter of the Daivi Prakriti, which the non-devotees are not doing. So a non-devotee who's in the mode of goodness and a devotee who's in the mode of goodness differ greatly in that the non-devotee's mode of goodness is temporary. And if they don't take shelter of the Daivi Prakriti, then the modes of passion and ignorance will, sooner or later, pull it down into the gutter.
I see.
Whereas a devotee who's in the mode of goodness, because they are taking shelter of if they're taking shelter properly of the Daivi Prakriti, that mode of goodness will be purified to Shuddha Sattva platform, which means they will never fall back into the material pool. And if you see a devotee fall from the mode of goodness into lower modes, it's only due to the fact that they're not properly taking shelter of the Daivi Prakriti.
Is it also because of their faith, depending on the degree of their faith? I know like in chapter 17 it explains our faith depends on, I guess, where we are situated.
Our faith, is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, faith is why do I take shelter of something? Because I have faith. It's pouring down rain outside and I say, here's an invisible, I have like an invisible umbrella and I give it to you. Oh, just take it outside, it'll protect you from the rain. You don't have any faith in that umbrella, so you don't take it. But if you have faith, you'll take it and you'll go outside and, oh, hey, how about that? Because you trust me, you have faith in me, so I'm not going to lie to you, even though it's invisible. So faith is what allows us to surrender. Why should I surrender to Krishna if I don't have any faith in him? He's going to probably cheat me. He's going to throw me off the cliff, I don't trust him. So faith means I trust.
Yes.
Okay, we better end there.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.